My name is Elizabeth, and every year for the last several years, I have endeavored to read as many of the Goodreads Choice Awards winners as I possibly can, so I can compile all of my reviews in one video for you, discuss the Goodreads Choice Awards in general, and also try to determine if these particular books deserve the acclaim and attention that they receive for winning the biggest bookish popularity contest on the internet. I want to be as upfront and honest as possible, so I'm telling you right off the bat that I did not read the winner of every single category from the 2025 Goodreads Choice Awards. There are two categories whose winners I did not read. In one category, I read the runner-up, so I can talk about that book for you, and in the other, no such luck. So when we get to those categories, I'll explain specifically why I skipped those winners. I am not trying to trick anyone into watching this video. If you're only watching for my reviews and reactions to those two particular winners, you will be disappointed because I did not read them. I also think it's important to acknowledge that the Goodreads Choice Awards is, at the end of the day, a popularity contest, which means that the nominees are chosen from a pool of books that have the most visibility on the bookish internet, which usually translates to the amount of money put into their marketing. The books that get the most votes are the books that the most people have at least heard of, even if they haven't read the book, which in turn, due to structural issues within the publishing industry, leads us to a pool of nominees and winners that tends to lack diversity. This leaves many international, marginalized, and underrepresented voices completely out of the conversation. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and recognize that, even if it is simply a symptom of a much larger structural and enduring issue within publishing that is not going to be dismantled in a day or with a single video. Even though not all of these categories are generally my cup of tea, I still try to go into every book I read for this challenge with an open mind, hoping to find at least something that I can enjoy or appreciate about it, even if it's not a book that I normally would have picked up. And to reflect my attempt to be as open-minded as possible and to find new books to love in unexpected places, I've styled myself with a bunch of heart jewelry from this video sponsor, Ana Luisa. I am a huge fan of Ana Luisa. I have been wearing their jewelry for so many years at this point. I would say over 95% of my jewelry collection is from Ana Luisa, and their pieces are the pieces that I wear literally every single day. Ana Luisa's pieces find the perfect medium between being really high quality and having amazing longevity while also being affordable. They're amazing options for gifting to your loved ones and also for getting yourself a little something special. There are Ana Luisa pieces in my collection that I have worn regularly for years and years and years, that I've slept in, showered in, worn to the gym, that still look absolutely brand new. Because I have 6 piercings in my ears, I'm automatically stacking earrings on a daily basis, and Ana Luisa makes so many pieces in a variety of styles, in a variety of sizes, that make it so easy to build your own ear stack and really express your style with pieces that are timeless and beautiful. As I mentioned, I went with a heart theme today, and I love the combination of these pieces. My necklace is the Lev Puffed Heart necklace, and I love that it's simple and refined, but also really packs an impact. In my third piercing, I have the teeny tiniest little beaded huggy earrings that I've owned for years at this point. These are my absolute favorite for my third piercing because they're nice and tiny and really hug my ear so that they never get caught on anything or get in the way. In my second piercing, I have the Jessica Puffed Heart hoops. These are adorable and perfectly match my Lev necklace. And then in my first piercing, a little bit of a different style, these Lev threaders with a little heart on the end. They are so cute, and I love that you can adjust how low they hang depending on how much you thread them through your ear. Ana Luisa does rigorous testing on their high performance materials to make sure that every piece is life-proof, tarnish-free, water-resistant, and hypoallergenic. And there's no risk in trying Ana Luisa either, because every single one of their pieces is covered by a 2-year warranty. They recycle materials whenever possible and have carbon and water neutral operations. So you can feel good about your choice to order from Ana Luisa, both for your budget's sake, but also for the planet. Ana Luisa also ships worldwide to 150 countries. If you're looking for the perfect, affordable pieces to gift to a loved one or for a special treat for yourself, be sure to check out Ana Luisa with a link in my description box. Thank you so much to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. And now let's jump in to the first category from the Goodreads Choice Awards 2025, History and Biography. And the winner of this category, with 45,858 votes, was How to Kill a Witch: The Patriarchy's Guide to Silencing Women by Zoe Venditozzi and and Claire Mitchell. This is not the first time that the winner in one of the nonfiction categories has been essentially a podcast in book form. Claire and Zoe are the hosts of the Witches of Scotland podcast, which I had never heard of, but now I'm definitely going to have to check out. And what I personally found the most interesting about this book is that it is focused primarily on the treatment of supposed witches in Scotland, rather than the American-centric Salem witch trials. Though they do have a chapter talking about Salem in this book, the vast majority of the book is very laser-focused on the experiences of women in Scotland and the circumstances that led to women being accused of witchcraft and what they went through when they were so accused. This book has an average rating of 4.07 on Goodreads, though it hasn't been read and reviewed that much. Maybe I'll include these numbers because it's really interesting to look and see that this book only has roughly 4,000 ratings on Goodreads with 710 written reviews, but it was voted for almost 46,000 times, which makes me wonder if the 10 times more people who are voting for this book have actually read the book, and if so, why they haven't rated it yet. I don't personally vote for any book I haven't read in the Goodreads Choice Awards, but I don't think that's universal, unfortunately. Though to be fair, I read this book and I haven't rated it on Goodreads yet, but that's just because I was waiting till I made this video. Regardless, I really liked this and I ended up giving it 5 stars. I think this is a really great overview of the history of witches in Scotland. As much as the subject matter is quite dark and difficult to read about, and the realities of what these women went through is pretty terrifying, I do think it's valuable to understand our own history, to understand how we have treated women in the past, how we have punished women for being different or for speaking up and having a voice, for being too visible, for being too independent in the past. And the more aware we are of our history, the more likely we are to hopefully be able to see when history is beginning to repeat itself and do something to prevent the same kind of atrocities that we experienced in the past. And that's something that's really emphasized in this book, and I really appreciated that Claire and Zoe were drawing parallels between history and present day, and also making it very clear that we are not so different from the mobs in the past who killed women as witches. We are not so removed from this mob mentality and violence and hysteria, and that it is vitally important to understand our history if we're going to have any hope of preventing history repeating itself. And as much as I would love to live in a world in which the witch trials are no longer relevant and not necessary to understand because women are finally just equal and not the target of witch hunts, I unfortunately can see in many places in the world this regression in how women are being treated, uprisings of misogyny and laws being passed or revoked, protections of women being eroded, especially when it comes to bodily autonomy and our right to choose, reproductive rights. While I feel very lucky to live in Canada and to currently still have all of my rights, that's not a done deal. It's not set in stone. There are those who are trying to erode women's rights here in Canada, and I've been absolutely horrified to watch what's been happening in the US over the last couple years with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And I just think that now is still the time to educate ourselves about the history of patriarchy and misogyny. And as much as I hate the fact that it's still so relevant and still so important, it just is important to educate ourselves and to understand our history and to arm ourselves with knowledge so we can do our best to protect ourselves. And I think this book was really well done. It shared a huge amount of information, but it did so in a really accessible and engaging way. I found it fascinating to learn about the witch trials in Scotland, and they have a very long, bloody history to dive into. I have a personal family connection to Scotland, and this made me wonder what it was like for my ancestors, specifically my female Scottish ancestors, if they lived in fear of being persecuted as a witch through these centuries in which women were controlled in this way. This is a pretty quick read. Like I said, very accessible, even though they share a lot of information. It's very engaging and really makes you think about fear and control and power. I listened to the audiobook and I thought it was really well done. It's narrated by the authors, and I suppose that that will be extra nice for anyone who listened to the podcast and is familiar with their voices. I will definitely have to check out the podcast after this. But like I said, I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars and I would highly recommend it. Now, history and biography is not not a genre or a category that I read from all that often. I would say pretty much once a year when I do this challenge is when I read books from this category, though there are so many nominees in this category that look absolutely incredible. Jane Austen's Bookshelf, Baldwin: A Love Story, The Cure for Women, Original Sins, A Flower Traveled in My Blood, The Zorg, and so many more. It seems like a really stacked category, but based on my experience with How to Kill a Witch, I do think that this is a worthy winner, and I think it is more than worth your time if you want to check it out. If you have any interest at all in learning more about witches, and specifically witches in Scotland, this is an amazing read and very comprehensive. Next up, we have another category I don't typically read from all that often, which is memoir. Not because I have anything against memoirs or dislike them. I'm just much more of a reader of fiction than nonfiction, so I typically am not picking up memoirs and other types of nonfiction regularly throughout the year. But the winner in the memoir category in 2025, with 57,544 votes, was The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom by Shari Franke. Now, Shari Franke is very young. She was, I believe, at the time of publishing this memoir, only 21 years old. And I will say that one of my biggest qualms with some of the memoirs that I've read over the years is that the author is not necessarily in a place where they have had enough time to reflect and process their lives and what happened to them and their trauma. And when that's the case, I often find that the resulting memoir is a little less introspective and thoughtful, analytical, and deep than I would personally prefer for a memoir. I have found over the years that typically the memoirs that I like best are the memoirs written by older people looking back on their lives with a much more perspective. And that's not a universal thing for sure. I've definitely read memoirs written by young people that have absolutely blown me away and had a lot of self-awareness and reflection and had a lot to give, but that's just generally a trend that I've noticed. So I did want to note that Shari is only 21. And while she's talking about essentially her entire life, and so there are some events that she's had a lot of time to process, some of the events in this book and some of the later and most shocking and most widely publicized events in this book happened in the couple years leading up to publication. And I do feel that there are aspects of these events and certain people involved that she doesn't necessarily have as much perspective on as she would have if she'd had more time to sort of process everything. Now, in a little bit of a reversal from the last category, this one has over 181,000 ratings, but was only voted for 57,000 times. I think because this was such a huge, buzzy book, this was a situation that a lot of people knew about and were invested in. There was a lot of curiosity about this memoir, that there are a lot of people who are maybe not really Goodreads users or the kinds of people who would vote in the Goodreads Choice Awards who were picking up, reading and reviewing or rating this book. So it's just interesting to see the comparison between the last category and this one based on those numbers. But The House of My Mother has an average rating of 4.3 on Goodreads. I gave it 3 stars. And for me, 3 stars is a good rating, but it's very much straight down the middle. And the reason for that for me, and I want to be sensitive because Shari went through a lot and her siblings went through a lot. It is no minor thing to be the victim of extended abuse from the people who should be protecting you. To be a child abused by a parent is something that no one should ever experience. And there were many times listening to this memoir that I got extremely emotional because the things these kids went through are horrific and their mother is a monster. And none of this should have happened. But there were a few things that I struggled with this memoir in particular. The first thing is that Shari does not hold her father to account. She puts essentially the entirety of the blame of what she and her siblings went through on her mother's shoulders and on the shoulders of another woman from outside the family who got heavily involved in their family dynamic. While their mother was the primary perpetrator of abuse on her kids, her father was more than an accomplice in the abuse. Her father was there through their entire childhood. He did not protect his kids. He didn't stop his wife from abusing their kids. And he eventually left the home when asked to, knowing he was leaving his young children in an abusive situation, and didn't check up on them or ensure their safety over an extended period of time, at which point the abuse escalated to even more horrific and impossible to understand levels. And I unfortunately have seen some of the images of the state of Shari's 2 youngest siblings when they eventually were rescued by police when her youngest brother escaped, where they were being held captive, and got help. And it is absolutely disturbing to see what those kids went through. And I'm so sorry. Actually, I'm not. I'm not sorry. Her father should have done something. He should have been there, or he should have protected his kids. And the fact that he didn't, and the fact that Shari has this loving buddy-buddy relationship with her dad and seems to have forgiven her father for his role and for his passivity and for his lack of any backbone whatsoever, to me is very clear evidence that she has not had enough time to reflect and to realize her father's role in this situation. And I was very frustrated by the way that her father was portrayed in the book. Yes, she is critical of him. Yes, she points out the ways in which he didn't stand up for his kids. But to me, it felt like she was much too gentle on him. And that was very hard to read, because it's not enough to not be the one who is actively putting your hands on your kids. If you know that your spouse is doing that, if you're witnessing them doing that and you don't stop it, you are abusing your kids. And clearly I feel very passionately about this. I was absolutely baffled by the way the book ended, and by their reconciliation, and by the way that she talked about her father in the last section of the book. And I worry for her younger siblings, who were then put in their father's care because he had proven himself to not be a competent parent before that point. But anyway, I'm going to stop. I get really worked up about this, but that was really hard to read. The other aspect of this that I think maybe Shari hasn't had enough time to get perspective and reflect on is the ways in which Mormonism is deeply intertwined with the beliefs and actions of her parents, and specifically her mother. Her mother's obsession with obedience and compliance comes directly from the teachings of the Mormon Church. And Shari, as far as I know, is still an active member of the church. She relatively recently graduated from BYU. I believe she was married in the temple. And while it's certainly not my business what anyone believes and what religion anyone is, this memoir did not dive into the ways in which the Mormon Church and Mormon teachings lend themselves to this kind of child abuse. This is just another example where I think that with more time and space, whether Shari remains part of the church or not, that's not as relevant as her growing to understand that her mother's actions and beliefs are not some sort of a twisting of Mormon beliefs and teachings, that they are very in line with what Mormonism teaches, and that the church also has a responsibility here. Now, I'm an atheist and I've never been a Mormon. I do know Mormons personally, and they are very lovely people, but I don't have personal experience with the religion. I did watch a video from an ex-Mormon breaking down the ways that Mormon teachings align with what happened to this family and the beliefs of their mother and this other woman who influenced her actions and beliefs and parenting style. So I will link that down below if you want an ex-Mormon's perspective, a very scripture-informed take on Mormonism's responsibility in this case. I want to be gentle on Shari because she's been through a lot and she's only 21. And I think she's going to be unpacking this trauma for a very long time. But I do also worry that perhaps the publisher or agents or someone else involved might have pressured Shari into writing and publishing this book sooner than she might have been ready to reckon with all of this. And I personally hope that in the future, after many more years of therapy and time to process and sort of deconstruct all of this, that she can write another memoir, or maybe one of her siblings can write a memoir about their experience and be able to look at it with a little bit more objectivity and really see the bigger picture, because it felt like there were a lot of pieces missing for me here. I didn't know a huge amount about this case going into this memoir. I did know in passing about the 8 Passengers family vlogging channel and the fact that the mother and her business associate had both been sentenced to prison terms for child abuse. And I was aware that they were Mormons, but otherwise I really didn't know very much about them or this situation. And while I don't think it's absolutely necessary to be familiar with the case to read this memoir, it did feel like it was written with the expectation that those reading would already be familiar with the case. And so there were several times when I found myself doing a little more research to try to understand what happened in moments when Shari was a little bit more vague, or times when the timeline got a little confused for me. So just keep that in mind. If you're completely unfamiliar with this family and with this case, you might have to do a little bit more research on the side to fully understand the situation and the timeline, especially, which I found found a little bit confusing. So again, this is just my own personal opinion, and it's very hard to rate and review a memoir. I want to be sensitive to the experience that Shari and her siblings went through, but I also feel that this memoir didn't explore all of the factors involved to the extent that I would have expected. I would still recommend it to anyone who is interested in this case and wants to hear from the perspective of the kids in this situation. I have not read any of the other memoirs in this category, though several of them are interesting to me and I'm hoping to get around to at some point. For that reason, I can't say that any of them were more deserving of winning than The House of My Mother. Next up, we have the general nonfiction category, and the winner with 114,142 votes was Everything is Tuberculosis: The History and Persistence of Our Deadliest Infection by John Green. And I have read John Green before. The last time was the Anthropocene Reviewed, which also won the Goodreads Choice Awards maybe 2 years ago. But otherwise, I haven't read any other John Green. I've never read any of John Green's fiction. This is another book that has significantly more ratings than it does votes. This has almost 200,000 ratings with an average rating of 4.36. Now, this was not the nominee in this category that I was most drawn to. There were several other picks in the nonfiction category that seemed much more up my alley just based on the description, the subject matter. But I will say that I was very pleasantly surprised by this, and maybe I shouldn't be because I did really enjoy the Anthropocene Reviewed, but I really liked this. I thought this was really well done. I must admit, I have never looked into nor thought that much about tuberculosis. I was not aware of all the ways in which it has impacted our history and how intertwined it is with human history on such a fundamental level. But John Green has self-admittedly been obsessed with tuberculosis for a while, and that is very clear here in a great way. I think that this book was not only, similar to How to Kill a Witch, it was very comprehensive. It covered a lot of bases. It talked about a lot of things, but it did so in a really accessible, engaging way. And it also made me cry a few times. I'm not too proud to admit, it did make me cry a few times. Talking about Henry and his story especially, it was fascinating, it was informative, it was also galvanizing, and I loved the ways in which John Green pointed out that tuberculosis does not have to continue to take so many lives every year, and that capitalism and greed are causing many deaths that could very easily be prevented, and talks about how a tiny change in the pricing, in profit margins, could make such a significant difference in the lives of so many people. I loved that he talked about the intersectionality of tuberculosis and the reasons why certain areas are much more heavily impacted, and all of the various socio-political systems at play that have caused certain areas to be hit much harder by tuberculosis than others. I just thought that this was very, very well done. And as you might be able to guess, based on the way that I'm raving about this, I really loved this and I gave it 5 stars. I think this is very much worth your time and very much makes you invested in, makes you care about tuberculosis and those who are facing it without sufficient healthcare and resources. I haven't read any of the other nominees in the nonfiction category, but many of them are on my TBR, and I've been very interested to read them. I'm actually considering doing a video where I read the top 10 nominees for the nonfiction category. It seems like a very stacked category, but I'm not surprised that John Green, as a very popular YouTuber and author in his own right, would have won this category because he has the name recognition that many of the other authors in this category do not. So now we're moving out of the nonfiction categories and we're getting into the 2 YA categories, starting with general young adult fiction. And the winner in this category for 2025 was a contemporary romance with 46,319 votes, Fake Skating by Lynn Painter. I've never read anything from Lynn Painter before. I know nothing about her or her books. I also don't typically read a huge amount of YA these days. I'm finding myself less and less drawn to YA over the years, and just the tropes and the writing style and the conventions of YA are less to my taste. But I have definitely read some YA contemporary romance over the years that I found to be quite sweet and that I've enjoyed. So I went into this hoping for the best. I will say that I also have never read any hockey romance, nor do I have any interest whatsoever in hockey romance. So there's that as well. I know that hockey romance has become a trend in all age demographics of romance, but I, possibly because I'm Canadian and grew up with many hockey players, I have never found hockey players particularly appealing. They're not my type. generally. So I'll say that as well. Also, I just don't care about sports. I find sports very boring. I have never been and will never be a sports girly. I don't care about sports and I don't enjoy reading books about sports. So now that all that's out of the way, you might be able to guess how I felt about this book. It definitely wasn't for me. I was not the target audience, both in age demographic and also subject matter. But unfortunately, not only was this not to my taste in general, I also kind of hated how this was executed. This book has an average rating of 4.26 with roughly 62,000 ratings. My personal rating, though, was a little lower than that. I gave this 1 star. I did not have a good time with this book. And there are many things that I could say. There are many aspects of this that I didn't love. But the main thing, to be totally honest, was the swearing. I have never read a YA novel that has had so much swearing in it. Honestly, I'm not sure I've ever read any book ever that has had so much swearing in it. The swearing was so excessive, and this is coming from someone, I swear so much in my day-to-day life. I, for many years, didn't swear at all in my videos, and slowly over the years I've allowed myself to swear a little bit here and there. I still try to keep it to a minimum in my videos. This is my job, so I try to be a little bit more professional, but in my day-to-day life, I swear a lot. I swear frequently and casually. And yet, the swearing in this book was so ridiculously excessive, and especially when you take into account that it's YA, I am very confused by the choices here. And when I say excessive, I mean literally variations of the F word came up 292 times. The characters, including high school teenage characters, but also their parents, way more frequently than you would expect, said variations of the F word almost 300 times. That is absolutely mind-blowing to me, but also shit was used 208 times, hell 106, ass 26, balls 8 times, damn 41 times. In reading this, it felt like the characters swore literally every single sentence, sometimes multiple times in a sentence. And it was just overwhelming and it felt very weird to me. Not to say that teenagers don't swear a lot. I did think it was weird how often their parents were swearing in front of them and that they were swearing in front of their parents. Not to say that there aren't families or kids and parents that have that dynamic who will swear around each other, but that was not my dynamic with my parents. I vividly remember the first time I swore in front of my parents, and I think I was 16, and they were abashed, agog, agape. It was a whole thing. As an adult, I would swear in front of my parents and they wouldn't care. But as a teenager, it's a little different. And I just thought it was weird. I also just wasn't into the romance. I really didn't like the male love interest, Alex. I found him very off-putting, not only because he swears constantly, but also because he's just kind of an asshole in many ways. Danny was fine, our female protagonist. I found her a little bland, but fine. She apparently smelled like apple juice and flowers, and it's brought up many times that she smells like apple juice and flowers. And something about that, you know, apple juice in particular, maybe just because I was obsessed with apple juice as a small child, I associate apple juice with very young children. And so her smell being described as this erotic thing many times and attaching that to the smell of apple juice just unsettled me. Personally, maybe that's just a me thing. I felt like while these characters were very immature and a lot of the conflict of the book was just a complete aversion to communication, which unfortunately is common across all age demographics of romance that I have sampled, I was not into the dynamic. I didn't find it appealing. I found their miscommunication or just complete lack of communication very irritating. But I also found the extreme height gap trope thing very annoying. Once again, I find it annoying every time it exists. And in this case, these are teenagers. They're in high school. Boys generally have their growth spurts later than girls. And yet, our female protagonist is supposed to be tall for a girl. She's 5'7", and he's described as being a full foot taller than her. This is a 17-year-old boy who is apparently 6'7". I'm sure that happens sometimes, but it can't be that frequent. That just felt a little ridiculous to me, how huge he was described as a 17-year-old. Their chemistry was not doing it for me. The sexual energy, sometimes, you know, in general, I'm an adult, so when I'm reading YA romance, I usually hope that it's a little more romantic energy than sexual energy. I find it cute when it's, characters who have crushes on each other. In this case, there was a lot of overtly sexual energy. I think this book would have made more sense on pretty much every level if these characters were in college. I think it would have made it even more obvious how immature they are if they were a little older, but I do think them being actual adults, even if baby adults instead of teenagers in high school, would have made more sense on a bunch of levels. A lot of the dialogue in the more sexually charged scenes made me very uncomfortable. There was also a lot of praising Jesus. I don't know. I thought it was weird. The language was weird. He kisses like he plays hockey. They chased each other's lips a lot, holding me in place so she could kiss the ever-loving shit out of me. Praise Jesus. That's a direct quote. Give me everything, honey, please God. Also a direct quote. Gluttony wasn't my goal. Insatiable, ravenous, feral. Also at one point she talks about her grandfather giving her a gift that appeared to be a burgundy piece of clothing. And then she says, but actually it was a jersey. And I'm like, okay, if it was still burgundy, even if it's a jersey is a piece of clothing, and if it was burgundy, then it didn't just appear to be a burgundy piece of clothing. It literally is a burgundy piece of clothing. It just is specifically a jersey. I know that seems nitpicky, but the writing style was throwing me off. Okay, there were several moments where I just thought, why would you write it like that? I don't understand. Lots of reciting of lyrics for some reason. A lot of sipping each other, talking about kissing as sipping, which is gross. I was going to complain about the sort of main point of conflict for the characters, but I don't want to spoil it in case you actually do want to read this book. I personally wouldn't recommend it, but if you like sports in your books and you like hockey romance and you are into huge height gap tropes and you don't mind teenage characters swearing every other word, then maybe this will work for you. And I'm going to move on. 1 star for fake skating for me. I never would have picked this up outside of this challenge. It is not for me, but I also had a terrible time. The next and final YA category is young adult fantasy and sci-fi. They've combined the two into one category. And the winner, with a whopping 300,427 votes, that has to be the highest so far, was Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is the second prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. We have the original trilogy, which came out when I was a teenager, I think. And then in recent years, she's put out 2 prequels, and this is the second of the 2 prequels. So this one focuses on Hamish Abernathy, who is in the original Hunger Games trilogy as a mentor to the main characters. This is his experience in the Hunger Games. So the Hunger Games originally came out in 2008, so I would have been 16, and I read it when it came out. I think I also read Catching Fire and Mockingjay, and I know that I at least saw the original Hunger Games movie when it came out in theaters, whenever that was. That's it for me. I never reread the books. I don't think I saw any of the other movies at any point. I think if I'd been a little younger when it came out, it would have had a bigger impact on me. I think at the time that I read it, it just didn't burrow its way quite as deeply into my mind. And because I haven't reread these books at any point, they're very vague in my brain. But I did a little bit of research, and the internet told me that I didn't need to reread the Hunger Games trilogy to understand the prequels, that I should just read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which came out a few years ago, in 2020, so 5 years ago, and then Sunrise on the Reaping, and that would be enough context. So that's what I did. I read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which is not the winner, so I'll just very briefly say that I gave it 5 stars and I really liked it. I was very pleasantly surprised by how much I liked it. I thought it was very well done, very engaging, just really great, to be totally honest. Our main character is insufferable, but it was very well done. And then I read Sunrise on the Reaping, the winner of this category, and was even more blown away. This book broke me. I cried so much reading this book. I cried so many times throughout, but then especially, I would say, the last 100 pages. I'm surprised I have any water left in my body. And then especially the last 25, 30 pages of the book, I was just sobbing nonstop. This book was devastating on so many levels. And I think The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes was great. It was a really good read. I think it deserves 5 stars. That's why I gave it 5 stars. But it also is more of an outside perspective. Our protagonist is not in the arena in the Hunger Games and doesn't personally know all of the participants. In Sunrise on the Reaping, our protagonist Hamish is in the Hunger Games and has personal relationships with a lot of the other kids because they're all children and teenagers, but as young as 12. And he feels the losses on such a personal level. It is just absolutely horrific and horrifying to read. And I honestly think that reading it as an adult in my 30s made it hit even harder because I'm just so extremely aware of how young these kids actually are. Even Haymitch, who's one of the older kids and sort of takes on that role of protector for some of the other younger kids, is only 16. And 16 is so young. When I was 16 reading Hunger Games, they were my peers. And so I didn't necessarily think of them as being as young as they are. When I was 16, I felt like I was basically an adult. And I thought I knew a lot more than I know. And I felt much more grown up than I actually was. Now looking back, 16 years later, on 16-year-old me, I was a little baby child. I didn't know anything. And I was definitely a kid still in so many ways. And so reading this book, reading about 12-year-olds being murdered for entertainment and as a means of control for the population in this rigid authoritarian government is absolutely horrifying, devastating, disturbing. And like I said, it broke my heart. It made me cry so much. Haymitch went through so much. I just felt that this was incredibly well done, while also just like, why? Suzanne Collins, what is wrong with you? Why would you write this and put us all through this kind of torture? I thought it was really good. And I think both of these books, they're maybe a little bit on the nose with their themes, with the messaging, but also because they are aimed at a younger audience, I think that makes sense. I don't think that they are so overt or spell everything out to the reader to the point where someone reading it, especially a young person reading it, doesn't have to still engage their brain a little bit and get invested and really think deeply about what's happening. But it does sort of help them along a little bit more than an adult novel of this kind would, or that I would expect an adult novel to. And I think that makes sense for a YA novel and for a YA series. I don't think that it's overdone. I think it's just a very nice balance. I thought the writing was quite nice, especially in Sunrise on the Reaping. Both Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping bring in a lot of poetry and song lyrics. And I thought in both cases that that was well done, that they were incorporated really well and really enhanced the emotional impact of many of the scenes. I thought the characterization was great. I definitely felt very invested in these characters and their well-being and was very upset when bad things happened to any of them. This book has over 1 million ratings. So even though it has 300,000 votes, over 1 million people rated it. It has a 4.5 star rating, which is wild for over 1 million ratings. Very loved. I think that's very deserved. Like I said, I gave it 5 stars. I think it was fantastic. I have not read any of the other nominees, and to be honest, I probably won't read any of the other nominees. I'm not a huge YA reader in general these days, considering how fantastic it was. I think it deserves to be the winner, even if there might be other books that are just as great and maybe equally deserve to be the winner. I just think Sunrise on the Reaping was very, very well done. And honestly, now I kind of want to reread the original trilogy, even though it doesn't stand out to me as a huge part of my childhood or something that I was really invested in. I'm kind of curious to read it and then maybe to watch all the films, including the newer films. I don't know. Should I? Tell me in the comments. If I loved Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping, should I reread the original trilogy? Is it worth my time? Tell me in the comments. I don't know. But that was young adult, fantasy, and sci-fi. And that means now we're moving into the adult categories. Next up is the audiobook category, and I did not read the winner of this category. So this will be brief. And the winner in this category with 107,386 votes is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, narrated by Rebecca Solar and Teddy Hamilton. And I did not listen to this audiobook, and I did not read this book. While I read Fourth Wing years ago, I have a reading vlog if you want to watch my experience and my struggle. I didn't love it. I gave it 2 stars, and I was not interested in continuing on with the rest of the series. And then when I saw that Onyx Storm won in 2 categories in the Goodreads Choice Awards, I thought that maybe I could manage to read Iron Flame and then Onyx Storm so I could review them here. And I tried. I genuinely tried, okay? I put in effort and I read 19% of Iron Flame before I just could not do it anymore. I really tried. Honestly, I was very frustrated at myself that I couldn't keep going because I thought I might turn it into a reading vlog, and I'd filmed an introduction and I'd filmed my reaction to the first chapter and put a lot of time and effort in already, and then I just couldn't do it anymore. So I didn't read Onyx Storm. I don't know how good or not good the audiobook is. This series just isn't for me, and sort of mainstream romantasy as it currently exists is not to my taste. I find all the characters in this series deeply insufferable, and I find the writing quality to be pretty poor. In my personal opinion, I don't enjoy the writing style. I don't enjoy the tropes that are heavily relied upon, and I just find it very, very hard to get through personally. So that's why I DNF'd Iron Flame and did not read Onyx Storm. I'm sorry that I can't tell you how good or not good the audiobook is. If you like the series, you'll probably like the audiobook, I imagine. It seems like there are two versions, and it seems like the one that was nominated here is the sort of regular audiobook, but there's also a full cast graphic audio. I'm kind of surprised that that's not the one that was nominated, but what do I know? Didn't listen to either of them. This one has 1.6 million ratings with a 4.21 average. So people love this book and love this series. Not me, but lots of people do. So you might enjoy it. You might. I don't know. I have listened to some of the other audiobooks that were nominated, and all of them were well done. My personal favorite of the nominated audiobooks was Great Big Beautiful Life, narrated by Julia Whelan. I think Julia Whelan is quite good at her job. She's a very good narrator, and I think she did a good job with Great Big Beautiful Life. So that was the one that I personally voted for, but again, I did not listen to the winner, so it is what it is. Next up, we unfortunately have another category where I didn't read the winner, although in this case I did read the runner-up, so I can briefly review that one for you. But the winner of the debut novel category with 165,184 votes was Alchemized by Sen Lin Yu. And there are a couple reasons why I didn't read this book for this video. The first reason is that I just had zero interest in the premise of this book. I've been aware of this since it was a fan fiction, and the premise never appealed to me whatsoever. And this book is over 1,000 pages. So the idea of forcing myself to read 1,000 pages of a story that I had so little interest in felt like it would be abject torture. Also, this book, while they have attempted somewhat to separate it from the source material, originated as a fan fiction of a series that is tied to an author who spreads hate everywhere she goes, she who shall not be named. And as someone who is part of the queer community and loves my trans siblings with my whole heart, I do not want to read and promote and platform stories even tangentially connected to the evil that is she who shall not be named. So those are the reasons why I didn't read this book. I think they're totally valid. You can disagree, but it doesn't matter because I already didn't read it. I did, however, read the runner-up in the debut novel category, which was The Names by Florence Knapp, and this book was absolutely heartbreaking in a beautiful way. Since it wasn't the actual winner of the category, I'll try to be very concise in my review, but I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's near historical fiction. I don't know how to categorize it. It begins in the 80s and then travels through time and is following this family, and the mother has been asked or ordered by her husband to go to the registrar's office and give their newborn son a name, and he has told her what the name should be, which is his own name, and she heads to the registrar's office with her newborn baby son and her little girl and has a discussion with her daughter on the way about naming the child, and talks to her daughter about how she had a different name in mind that she really liked, and her daughter suggests a name that she would have picked. And the book is basically following 3 branching versions of reality where she chooses to name her baby boy 3 different names. In one version of history, she names her son Gordon after her husband, as expected. In another version, she names her son Julian, which is the name that she personally really liked and was drawn to. And in another version, she names her son Bear, which is the name that her daughter chose. And it explores the different ways that names can impact our lives and shows how differently this boy's life turns out based on how he's named, and also the impact on the rest of the family, and also gets pretty deep into examining the domestic abuse dynamic between the mother and father in this family. The father is very abusive to the mother, and there are 3 different versions of the outcome of that situation, and I found it absolutely devastating. There were also so many heartwarming and lovely, endearing moments that I really adored. I loved these characters so much, but also it was so hard to read. It was so sad. It was so hard to read about this abusive dynamic and the ways in which it escalates and the rippling effects on other people. And I just thought this was really, really beautifully done. It has intense and difficult subject matter, but I felt it was handled in a really compassionate and thoughtful way. And on top of that, I think the way that this novel examines how our names can really shape our lives was really fascinating and very well done. One of my sort of niche interests in life is nominative determinism, which is the theory that people's lives are shaped by their names, that their names sort of send them on a particular path and that people view them differently based on their name. This is a theory that I came across in high school, I think, and I just thought it was really interesting, and I've always found it interesting. So I think that part of this was very well done, and I found it to be a really unique idea and very engaging to watch the different ways that his life could progress, the different careers he chooses, and the ways it impacts his personality and how other people view him based on his name, but also, like I said, those rippling effects. Just fascinating. It's such an interesting idea. It's such an interesting theory. And I think that this novel had a huge amount of heart and was really beautifully done. And it made me cry a lot. And I would highly recommend it. So even though this was not the winner of this category and was pretty far behind, I would say, in the votes. Let's see, it has an average rating of 4.15 with 170,000 ratings, so not bad, but it only had 52,000 votes. 52,001 votes to Alchemized 165,184. So pretty far behind, but I thought it was really gorgeous, and I would highly recommend it if you're looking for a debut author, a debut novel to check out. The Names by Florence Knapp was really gorgeous. I haven't personally read any of the other nominees in this category, but quite a few of them are on my TBR, like Junie, The Lilac People. Oh no, I lied. Okay, it wasn't in the top 10, but one of the nominees in the first round was Woodworking by Emily St. James. I did read that book, and it was incredible. 5 stars also. Would also highly recommend. That was one of our book club picks in 2025, and I just thought it was gorgeous. It was so, so, so well done. So also Woodworking, check that one out if you haven't. I think The Names and Woodworking are both equally deserving of winning this category, and they're both amazing books that I gave 5 stars to. So I've also heard really good things about The Correspondent, which was in 3rd place by Virginia Evans. Have not read it yet, but I've heard that it's quite good. So anyway, that is the debut novel category. Next up, we have the horror category. I am a pretty voracious reader of horror these days. I definitely lean more towards, or my preferences are more in the literary horror space, but I read a lot of horror. So this is, I believe, the category from which I'd read the most nominees. So I have a little bit more perspective here than some of the other categories, but the winner of the horror category with 59,603 votes was Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. And I think this might ruffle some feathers because I know that Grady Hendrix is very loved, and I do know that a lot of women really like his books and like how he writes women. So sorry in advance, you're allowed to like him and like how he writes his books. I personally am not a fan, and I was very hesitant to read this book because I was worried I would feel similarly to how I felt in the past, and I did. I have the same issues, so I'll get into them here, but I know that I am probably in the minority in my opinion, but it's still my opinion. This book has an average rating of 3.91. This might be the lowest average rating so far, with 120,177 ratings. This book for me personally was 1 star. I feel like I'm hesitant to get into this because I know that people feel really strongly about this book and about the subject matter, and that is actually the first thing I want to bring up. I can't say for sure because I am none of these other people. I'm not in their heads or hearts, and I don't know why they loved this book, but many of the positive reviews I saw, many of the most raving reviews I saw, really highlighted that this premise was important and that this issue was very timely. And because it was important and timely, that it really resonated with people. And I think specifically with the demographic that is probably the biggest voting block for the Goodreads Choice Awards, I would imagine, which is American adult women. This book is about pregnant teenage girls prior to Roe v. Wade being sent to a home so that they don't bring dishonor upon their families as they finish their pregnancy and give birth and their babies are adopted, and then they can return to their lives and pretend nothing ever happened. And this book very much focuses in on the horror of teenage girls, children being pregnant and not having basic human rights and bodily autonomy to make decisions about their own bodies and what happens to their bodies, but also having the choice of whether to keep their babies or not. taken away from them. And it also somewhat focuses in on the horror of pregnancy itself and childbirth itself and how dangerous and difficult it is. And I understand why especially American women would find this very timely and very important and very emotionally intense to read now after Roe v. Wade has been overturned in the US. And I have empathy for and sympathy for my neighbors to the south who have had their bodily autonomy stripped from them, who have had their rights taken away. It is horrific and horrible, and the subject matter here is really timely, and I understand that. I do wonder if the importance of the subject matter and the timeliness is eclipsing the actual story and the execution of the story for some readers. I feel like so many more reviews, I haven't counted, I haven't figured out the statistics of how many 5-star reviews are talking about the timeliness and the importance of the subject matter over the characterization and the actual writing of the story and how the subject matter is handled specifically in this book and how this book is structured and paced. I don't know what the proportion is. I just know that anecdotally, while looking at reviews, I saw a lot of people talking about the ideas more so than the actual execution. And for me also, I think the premise, the ideas being explored, and the timeliness of this are more impactful than the actual story itself, for me anyway. And there are a few reasons for that. For me personally, I found this book to be very poorly paced. I found it to be very repetitive. I thought the writing style was nothing special, and I found the characters to be very flat. I know there are a lot of women out there who love Grady Hendrix and love how Grady Hendrix writes women. In my limited experience with him, I think he writes women as people, which is a very low bar, but unfortunately one that many male authors can't clear. So I will give him that. He does write women as if they are human beings, which is great, appreciated. But I have found his female characters to be very flat and lacking in complexity and nuance and rich inner lives. And I found that to be the case in this book. I feel like we learned very little about these characters, even our protagonist. We spend a lot of time with these characters, and by the end of it, I feel like I knew very basic personality traits, maybe 1 or 2 interests or hobbies per girl, and that's it. There was a real lack of rich character development for me personally. I also found our protagonist to be very frustrating, which maybe is realistic for her age, but she flip-flopped a lot. She would make decisions and be very passionate about her choice and then go back on her decision in the next chapter and then take another few chapters to build up to making that decision again and then go back on it again. And it just became very frustrating to be in her head again. Maybe realistic for her age, but considering we are following her experience, I feel like we got to know her on a very surface level and that's it. And the surface level we got to know, I found quite frustrating. Also, like I mentioned, I think this book was poorly paced. It took a very long time for the action to really pick up and start. First 30 to 40%, very little is happening and things really ramp up and happen very quickly in the end. I think it was quite uneven and it was very repetitive, not only in our main character and her thoughts and decisions and so on, but also just the writing was quite repetitive. The same sort of phrases and ideas came up over and over again, and the plot just felt like it kept rehashing itself. I think this book could have been a lot tighter, could have been quite a bit shorter, and would have been more effective. Also, I didn't love how this book handled the subject matter. I think it's fair to acknowledge the inherent horror of teenagers, children, being pregnant. I think it's fair to write books that examine the danger and the difficulty of pregnancy and childbirth, both the physical impact but also the emotional impact. I'm not inherently against horror novels that examine aspects of womanhood through a horror lens. I would say a lot of my favorite books probably do that. What I have trouble with is how this book in particular framed the horror, which felt more objectifying than I would personally like. I found the excessive focus, especially on their bodies and how pregnancy was changing their bodies, especially because they are children, very uncomfortable. It felt very voyeuristic or fetishizing, objectifying, dehumanizing at times. I just found it incredibly uncomfortable. And I'm not someone who is against, again, books that explore maybe the terror that can come with pregnancy and childbirth. I think it's fair to explore. Do I think that a man is the person to explore this issue? No, not really. And it's not that men can't write women's stories ever. I know that Grady Hendrix said that he talked to a lot of women and did a lot of research, and that's great. And that women in his family had these experiences and he wanted to write about them. And I hope that the women in his family feel that he did their stories justice. I just don't think it's his place, to be totally honest. I think this is a subject worth writing about. I think it is a story that a woman should tell, to be totally honest. And if this was the only time he'd done it, I would still not like it, but it would be one thing. The fact that he seems to have built his entire career on writing specifically horror stories about women, books that are fundamentally about women suffering, is uncomfortable to me, and I don't like it. The added fact that he has a very ambiguous name, that a lot of women read his books and are not aware that he is a man writing these stories, I think it's weird. And I think this story, now that this book exists, I think a woman writing a story about the same subject matter would not get the same attention. People who read this book might not pick up another book about it because they think, well, I just read about this issue, I don't need to read another book. He has sort of cornered the market. He has claimed this space within publishing, at least for now and at this time, and specifically in this time where it is so timely. And he is the one getting the acclaim and the money and the accolades for writing the story when it's, again, very much not his story to tell. I would feel that way even if I thought this book was perfectly executed, but I also don't think that that's the case. There are a lot of aspects of this book that just didn't work and were not particularly well done. The witches also, the witch element was thrown in as an afterthought. I think it was confirmed in an interview at some point that the original version of this book didn't even have witches. That's very obvious. I'm not a fan. And I understand that not everyone's going to agree. Different people are going to perceive things differently. I'm not saying men can't write books about women or that men can't write about female protagonists. I recently read a book by Nat Cassidy that was specifically a horror novel about a new mother with a female protagonist who had just given birth, and a lot of the book was about motherhood. And while I also questioned why he was writing that story and why that was his story to tell, I did think that that book was pretty well executed and I enjoyed it. So it's possible for a man to write a female protagonist and to do it well. It's possible for men to explore women's issues and do it well. I just don't personally think that Grady Hendrix does do it very well, and I don't understand why he has built his entire career on horror about women. I think at the very least, he could have donated a portion of the proceeds of this book to actually support the real life women and girls who have lost their access to reproductive health care in the US. I did some research. Feel free to let me know if I missed something in the comments. I would love to be corrected if he has pledged to donate, but I would presume that based on a book that has been this popular, I would presume that he's made a pretty penny off of this book and will continue to. And at the very least, he could be donating money to help those who don't have access reproductive health care, or donating money to Planned Parenthood or something. Again, in my research, I have not seen any evidence that he's done this. This to me feels like the bare minimum if he's going to be making his career off telling these stories that are not his stories to tell. And this is not to say that those who disagree with me are wrong. This is not a judgment on anyone who enjoys Grady Hendrix's books or likes how he writes women or loved this book, because I know a lot of people feel strongly about it and really liked it. That's totally fine. You're allowed to feel that way. And this is not a critique of you at all. This is me critiquing Grady Hendrix and his choices and questioning why he has built this career that he has and whether there are any ethical dilemmas involved, what the morality is here, and who is allowed to tell what stories and who is allowed to profit off of and make a career off of certain stories, and whether we have an obligation as readers to consider the source of the stories that we're reading. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, that being said, like I mentioned, I read several of the other nominees. The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones, which I gave 5 stars to. Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang by Kylie Lee Baker, which I also gave 5 stars to. Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, I gave 4 stars. We Love You Bunny by Mona Awad, I gave 5 stars. Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna Van Veen, I gave 3 stars to. Immaculate Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. I gave that 5 stars, and several others are on my TBR or I have started reading. I personally voted for Bat Eaters and Other Names for Corzang by Kylie Lee Baker. An incredible book, one of my favorites of 2025. Absolutely devastating and gorgeous and emotional and so well done. And I would highly recommend it if you're a fan of horror and you haven't read it yet. Please go read it, but also go read all these other books because they're all great. And I think all of them were better than Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. So I think any of them could have won and I would have been happier, but especially Bat Eater and Other Names for Corzang. I think it deserved the win significantly more. And that is a book in which the issues that are being explored are the personal experience of the author. And I just personally would love to lift up and highlight stories where the author is writing about their own experiences rather than someone who doesn't share the same marginalizations profiting off of someone else's story. And now we'll move on because I've talked about that for way too long. So let's move on to the science fiction category. I also read quite a bit of sci-fi. I love science fiction. It's one of my favorite genres. So I was excited to read the winner in this category. And the winner with 45,287 votes was The Compound by Aisling Rawl. Sci-fi generally has fewer votes than the other categories. I think sci-fi is not as popular as some other genres on Goodreads, but The Compound actually has quite a few ratings, 96,000 ratings, but an average rating of 3.56. But The Compound is it has an interesting premise. I think some people, especially those who are really into specifically hard sci-fi and sci-fi specifically set in space or with aliens, might not consider something like The Compound science fiction. It is science fiction. It's just a different genre of science fiction. I do think that maybe science fiction has to create more distinctive subgenres to separate some of these things because there's a lot of argument about what counts as science fiction. Regardless, The Compound is more of a sort of near future dystopia, looking at how our own world, our current society could progress in a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, how increasing political instability and environmental destruction and wealth inequality and rampant capitalism could erode society as we know it and the impact it would have on people. So this is that sort of sci-fi. And this specifically is inspired by Love Island, a British television show, which I got really into several years ago. I watched the first 8 seasons of Love Island, 9 seasons, something like that, and I loved it. I would tune in every single day. It was my guilty pleasure. It was one of the only reality shows I could watch or was interested in watching. And for those who don't know, Love Island is a dating show where you have a group of men and women and they have to pair up in couples, heterosexual couples. And if you are single, you're at risk of being sent home. And the goal is to win in your couple. And you have to do challenges and games and things. And you're trapped in this villa together for several weeks. They don't know what time it is. They're not allowed any information about the outside world. They're not allowed books or music, and there's like an element of dystopia just in the concept of the actual show in real life. But this is sort of a, version of Love Island mixed with Black Mirror and a little bit of Lord of the Flies, a more intense and violent version, I would say. I didn't really know what to expect going into this. I was interested in the premise because I am a former fan of Love Island. I don't watch it anymore. I haven't watched the last several seasons, but I loved it for a time. And I do love this sort of subgenre of sci-fi that's near future dystopia, social commentary. And while this wasn't a totally perfect book for me, and it's not necessarily a brand new favorite, I really liked this. I gave The Compound 4 stars. I think that there is something really bleak about this book. There's this detached, existential quality to this story and to these characters. Our protagonist has sort of given up on the real world and on her real life and has really placed all her hopes on winning this competition and then just being able to live in the villa for as long as possible in luxury and comfort, separated from the rest of the world. And she's willing to do anything, or just about anything, to win. Things escalate quickly. There is definitely more violence in this fictional version of the show than there ever has been in the real show. There's quite a lot going on, and the producers are more sadistic than the real life producers. I could see why people would maybe not connect to the protagonist or to the style of storytelling. Our protagonist is very apathetic, and that sort of feeling really permeates everything. And I could understand why some people might find that off-putting or just hard to connect to. I think it was a really great reflection of how younger generations are feeling these days, existing in the world that their parents and grandparents have built, looking at their future 10, 20, 30 years out and seeing very little potential and feeling quite unmotivated to build a life in a world that feels like it's falling apart, for the increasing inequality and suffering. And I also liked the ways that this was more unhinged and sadistic and violent than the real show would be. I have questions about the regulations involved in this world. We learn very little about the outside world, and I selfishly would like to know more because I enjoy world building in my speculative fiction, and I wanted a little bit more context for what's going on in the outside world and why and how what's happening on the show is allowed by anybody. But I feel like it pulled its punches a little bit, and that's kind of where this is 4-star read for me instead of 5 stars. I think it could have gone even further in the end. I think things could have escalated more. I think things could have been even more unhinged and violent, to be totally honest. And I think that's coming from the fact that I do read quite a bit of horror, and I could see this turning into full-blown horror at the end. And there were definitely aspects of this, elements and moments that were horrific, but I just think it could have gone further. I think it could have, and I think it should have, personally. I do also think that the queer rep was a little toothless here. We have several characters who are bisexual, our protagonist and at least one other woman on the show, and then a man. I'm sure that not everyone will agree on this, but as a queer person reading it, as a bisexual person reading it, I like to see bisexual rep, but this to me felt a little empty. I wish we had gotten any more context for our protagonist being queer. It was sort of a throwaway comment for her. And also that the other characters who were implied to be or explicitly stated to be queer or bisexual, that they were given a little bit more, that there was a little bit more weight to the representation, I guess. A little more page time dedicated to it. I don't know. It just felt a little bit like lip service, but not real delivery. I'm not saying it was bad representation. I just wanted more from it, I guess. This maybe reads more like a thriller than anything else, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just think if you're going into this expecting science fiction, you might get something different out of it. I thought it was pretty engaging. I enjoyed it. I liked that very sort of apathetic, growing dread feeling. I enjoyed this idea of them having to compete in challenges to earn basic necessities like food and water, and that sometimes the challenges were extremely difficult to complete and caused some really intense, scary situations. I thought that that was really well done. There was definitely a lot of intensity and tension that I thought was very well done. And I just found it interesting, an interesting thought experiment, I guess. So anyway, I give The Compound 4 stars. I liked it. I would recommend if you're into this sort of subgenre of science fiction. I don't believe I've read any of the other nominees, although quite a few of them are on my TBR. I even have physical copies of some of these, like Salt Crop, Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor, who's one of my favorite science fiction authors. But there's also quite a few other books on this list that I've been very curious about, like Local Heavens, Of Monsters and Mainframes, and The Dream Hotel, among others. So this is another category that I've really been heavily considering doing a video reading the other main nominees, the finalists. But anyway, I did like The Compound. Is it the best of the best? I don't know, because I haven't read the other ones, but I did like it. So there's that. Moving on to the next category, which is fantasy. This is my most read genre in general, and always has been. I love fantasy. I'm a big fantasy reader, and I love many subgenres of fantasy. The winner, with 102,408 votes, was Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil by V.E. Schwab. This is a book that I was very, 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 very excited to read, and then I read it. And I was very, very disappointed. I have a whole video talking about why I was disappointed in this book, and I have waffled back and forth between giving it 3 stars or 2 stars. I've left it at 3 stars since I read it, but I have heavily considered changing my rating to 2 stars over the months since I read this. I feel like this had so much potential, and it just did not deliver any of what I was looking for, and I found it quite empty and bland and flat. So there's that. This book has an average rating of 3.95 with 155 roughly thousand ratings. This video is going to be so long, so I think I'm going to keep it brief, especially because I already have a dedicated video about this book. I'll link that down below if you want to hear all my thoughts, all my nitty-gritty thoughts. But I didn't love the way this book handled its themes. I didn't love the uneven structure and how little time was spent on certain characters, and the ways that some characters were really heavily featured in the first 3/4 of the novel and then sort of disappeared at the end. I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the lack of depth in the characterization for 2 of the 3 characters. I didn't really like the implications in the way that the book ended and the way that it handled its subject matter. I just wasn't really a fan of the execution here, and that's sad because I have really liked V.E. Schwab's work in the past, and I was very, very excited for this book, and the premise seemed right up my alley. But unfortunately, this just didn't work for me, so I gave it 3 stars. I also read the runner-up in this category, which is Tuberculosis by R.F. Kuang. This is another one that I was anticipating and thought would be right up my alley that I found to be disappointing, and it's also one that I have a whole video, a reading vlog in this case, of me reading and reacting to and reviewing it. For me, Catabasis was a 2-star read, and I was quite disappointed, again, unfortunately. Quite a few of the other books on this list are on my TBR, but I haven't read yet. The only other one I have finished, I believe, I'm just quickly scrolling to check. Yeah. The only other one I finished is The Strength of the Few by James Islington, and this was also a disappointment for me personally. Unfortunately, I think I gave it 2 stars, and I read this as part of a reading vlog as well, although it's not a dedicated video. So I'll link all those down below. Unfortunately, my track record with the nominees in the fantasy category this year was not great. I have heard really good things about some of the other nominees, especially The Raven Scholar, which many of you have been yelling at me to read for ages. I do plan on reading it, don't worry. The River Has Roots, also one that I've been told that I would love. Brigands and Bread Knives, I've loved the other books in this series, so I really need to get around to it. The Everlasting, I have also heard amazing things about. Maybe this is another category where I should read all the other nominees that I haven't read yet, because this is my most read genre and I do love fantasy, and try to find something that I would give the crown to, because of the 3 that I've read from this category, I don't think any of them deserve to win, unfortunately, in my own personal opinion. But again, I'll link all those videos down below if you want much longer reviews of those, because they exist, and I'll move on to the next category, which is Romantasy. And like I said, I did not read the winner of the Romantasy category with 298,565 votes, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. I already explained why I didn't read this in the audiobook section. Like I said, I tried to read Iron Flame and I couldn't get through it, so I did not read Onyx Storm. This is just not the series for me, and I have really struggled to find my place in Romantasy. On an intellectual level, just based on definitions, I feel like I should love Romantasy because I love fantasy and I am a romantic at heart and I ship characters in my fantasy all the time. And I love my fantasy to have romantic subplots. So you'd think that I would like fantasy that really focuses on the romance and really builds it. You know, some of my favorite fantasy ever maybe doesn't prioritize the romance, but definitely has quite a bit of romance, and I love it. I fall for it hook, line, and sinker. But I feel like every time I read something that I would maybe consider romantasy and I like it, I'm told that it's not romantasy. And anytime I read something that everyone agrees is romantasy, I have a really bad time. So I don't know if it's just the current crop of romantasy, what's popular right now, that I don't like. I mean, I know that that's true, that I don't like that, but I also wonder if just the genre in general is not for me. Maybe I'm more of a romantic fantasy person, fantasy romance. I don't know. There's so many different subgenres, but I want to find my corner of romantasy. So let me know in the comments if you have recommendations. I have a feeling that maybe queer romantasy is my path forward, but we'll see. The only other nominee that I've read from the list, Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales by Heather Fawcett. That's book 3 in the Emily Wilde series. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. It's not a favorite. I personally don't think it would deserve to win in this category. I think that if I'd finished Onyx Storm, I probably would have liked Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales more, but that doesn't mean that it's worth winning the category and getting all the acclaim. The only other books I'm interested in reading from the nominees are Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. I've enjoyed Rebecca Ross and her works in the past, so I have high hopes for that one. I did get an ARC, but I didn't get around to it before publication, so I really need to get on that. And then also A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana. I have a physical copy on my shelves back here somewhere, and I would really like to read that as well because I really enjoyed her first book. I gave 5 stars to. I'm hoping that I will also enjoy A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. Otherwise, literally none of the other nominees appeal to me at all. I have no interest based on the descriptions. Let me know if any of them are worth reading. I don't really understand Romantasy, and I guess I'm not the target audience. I don't know. I don't like the tropes. I don't like the way the characters are usually written, or the writing style in general is just not for me. Anyway, moving on to the romance category. And the winner of the romance category with 117,054 votes was Great Big Beautiful Life by Emily Henry. And while I really liked this book, I don't know that it fits romance. I think it probably fits better in contemporary fiction, just general fiction. There have been very mixed reactions to this book as far as I've seen. Actually, I'm very curious what the average rating is on Goodreads. This book has 692,000 ratings and the average rating's 3.96, so still pretty high. But I've seen a lot of people who generally like Emily Henry not like this book, and I think part of that is that it's less overtly romance than many of her other books. This one's definitely more general fiction, literary fiction, spatterings of historical fiction with a pretty heavy romantic subplot. So keep that in mind, I guess. I did really like this book, though. I personally gave it 5 stars. This is my favorite Emily Henry book that I have read. I found it very moving. I found the way it dealt with grief to be really beautiful. I read it at just the right time and was very taken by it. This book has my favorite female protagonist of any Emily Henry book, and my second favorite male love interest. My favorite male love interest is Miles in Funny Story, because he's basically my husband in character form. But I did really like the 2 love interests here and their romance. I thought it was very sweet. I liked the premise in general. I really liked our third sort of main character and getting to learn about her life story. I found her flashbacks, her telling her story, to be really interesting. And both in her storyline and in our protagonist's life, we're dealing with themes of grief and loss. And I read this book very shortly before my own father passed away, and I just felt it did such a beautiful job of communicating exactly how I was feeling in the fresh wake of grief. There are so many quotes that I went back to read after my father passed away and was just sobbing because they felt like they were being pulled out of my own heart or brain. I just thought this was really beautifully done. I really loved it. I might not be able to reread it for a long time because I think it will make me an absolute puddle on the floor mess, but I will reread it at some point. And like I said, it's my favorite Emily Henry book of all time. I do have a video talking about every single one of Emily Henry's books, or at least her 6 most recent releases. I have a video all about that, so I'll link it down below if you want my reviews of all of Emily Henry's sort of 6 main books, but really loved this one. I'm not sure that it fits very comfortably within the romance category, so I could understand why people would maybe argue with it winning this category, but I did love it, and I do think it deserves love and attention and acclaim. Even though, Emily Henry is very popular and is going to do well no matter what and doesn't need it, and maybe some of these other authors could have used the boost more. I have not personally read any of the other books in this list, so I can't tell you for sure if they deserve it or not. But I loved Great Big Beautiful Life. Moving on to the mystery and thriller category, and the winner with 77,149 votes was Not Quite Dead Yet by Holly Jackson. And this is the first time I'm reading any Holly Jackson, I believe. I have seen her name around. I've seen her books around. I believe she mostly was writing young adult for quite a while. This might have been her first adult fiction, if I'm not mistaken, but I haven't read any of her works before, so this is my first impression. And this book has 137,784 ratings with an average of 4.05, so pretty high average rating. And the basic premise here is that our protagonist is trying to solve her own murder. She's been fatally injured, but it's going to take her a while to die from her injuries, so she's trying to solve the murder before she dies. And I think that's a really interesting premise. It's kind of fun. Unfortunately, I didn't like this book. So I gave it 2 stars. I didn't absolutely despise it, but I didn't love it. I found it pretty annoying, to be totally honest with you. Our main character is in her late 20s, I believe, but she very much felt like a teenager. This felt quite YA to me, which would make sense if Holly Jackson sort of writing YA predominantly before this. I just found our main character very annoying. I found the way she kept talking about the fact that she was murdered and she's looking for her murderer quite irritating after the 20th time because she wasn't dead yet. And yes, I guess if someone attacks you with the intention of hurting or killing you, and then you are going to eventually die from those injuries, then I guess they did kill you. But I don't know, saying that she's been murdered as she's still alive just got annoying very quickly. I found the way that she treated her family to be appalling, especially her mother, who is written to be so annoying. But I just had a huge amount of sympathy for her mom because her daughter was refusing to spend any of her last days with her mother and also refusing to try any medical intervention to save her own life. I would also be upset if my child did that. So I get it. I understand her mom. I think that there's a lot of things that happen in this that are very hard to suspend disbelief for, and a lot that I can't talk about because it's spoilers and would give things away if you want to read this. I think the reveal of who did it was pretty unsatisfying. I think that the way the reveal happened and when it happened in the timeline was very unsatisfying. I also found the attempt at a romance just didn't click for me. Wasn't a fan. Also, there was an attempt at giving the characters more of a complicated backstory and implying that our protagonist was the cause of something really terrible happening to one of the other characters. And when it's finally revealed the secret that's been built up for the whole book, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's not our protagonist did something that was not cool, but she was also a teenager. The character who she influenced was a fully grown adult who made an absolutely ridiculous and super irresponsible and unkind decision that was not caused by a teenager. So I just found that very annoying. If you know, you know. How is that our protagonist's fault? I don't like the protagonist, but it's not her fault. Sorry. The protagonists are in their late 20s. They act like they're maybe 12. They make fun of old people for being old and do weird voices. And I don't know. I think I'm just going to move on because it's hard to talk about this without spoiling things. I don't want to give things away. If you are curious about reading it and want to try to solve the murder as you go along, I will just say that I agree with one review that I saw where someone said, this book would have been better if Jet just died the night she was attacked. And I agree. So that's that. While I personally was not a fan of this book, I am glad that it beat the runner-up, which was written by my nemesis, Frida McFadden. I do not enjoy Frida McFadden's books, and I'm very suspicious of how quickly she writes and publishes her books and the poor quality of them. I side-eye her whole production line. So her book was the runner-up, and I'm glad that it didn't win because I am not a fan of her books. The only other book I've read from the nominees is The Missing Half by Ashley Flowers, which I gave 4 stars to. I really liked that one. It was very much about sisterhood while also being a thriller and having its own, mysteries to unravel. So I personally would have chosen this one over Not Quite Dead Yet. I really liked The Missing Half. I would recommend it if you're looking for a thriller. I just noticed that Frida McFadden also has 2 other books on the nominees list. How many books did she put out in 2025? I swear to God, there's something fishy going on with Frida McFadden, especially the fact that the only images of her are her in disguise. I would not be surprised if Frida McFadden is actually just a name for a huge group of writers who are like think tanking as many books as possible to publish every single year. It makes no sense to me. And all her books are very formulaic and not very good. I don't understand it. Okay, anyway, moving on. This is not about her. The next category is historical fiction, and the winner with 254,774 votes was Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Now, to be totally upfront with you, I don't read a lot of historical fiction. I do on occasion, and I do tend to like the historical fiction I pick up. It's just not a genre I'm as drawn to on a day-to-day basis. Also, I've had mixed experiences with Taylor Jenkins Reid, and in a past Goodreads Choice Awards video, maybe 2 years ago, I didn't read her book that was the winner. When this book came out, I was not sure if I was going to read it or not. But after reading the premise and looking into it a little bit more, I decided I would give it a chance and see how I felt about it, because I have had sort of these ups and downs with Taylor Jenkins Reid. And this one has 660,000 ratings with an average rating of 4.34. So pretty great. And this is historical fiction about a female astronaut, sort of in the first group of female astronauts to be accepted into the NASA program, and also includes a sapphic romance. And even though I was really on the fence about whether I would pick this up or not, I'm very glad that I did, because I was very pleasantly surprised, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It wasn't an absolutely perfect book for me for a few reasons, but I did really like it, and I did cry a couple times. I really liked our protagonist. I liked the love interest. I enjoyed their romance quite a bit. I really liked the added details of our protagonist and her relationship with her sibling and with her niece, and the way that that plot line developed. I was very invested in that sort of side plot and really really loved it, was very emotionally invested in it. I thought that the little bit, we maybe got, it was maybe a little less focused on the space program itself and the experience of training and going to space than I might have expected, but I did like those sections. I thought they were interesting. It was definitely more focused on the characters and their relationships, the interpersonal relationships of our protagonist. I did feel that some of it was trying a little hard, a little over the top, maybe a bit saccharine. I still enjoyed it, but there were definitely moments where I felt like Reed was really trying to force you to feel things. And I was already feeling things, so I didn't need her to try so hard. I'll also say that as an atheist, there was a bit more God talk than I expected or tend to enjoy. It was fine. It's not my thing, personally. I also felt like the last section was a bit rushed and the ending was very abrupt. And I feel like we needed one more chapter or an epilogue or something. Where it cut off was a bit odd to me, but I did find the ending very moving and I cried a lot through it and I was very emotional. I just felt like it needed a little bit more of a conclusion that we didn't get for me personally. I would recommend it. I think a lot of other people have liked it and will like it. So I'm glad that I read it. Even if it wasn't a perfect book for me or if it's not an all-time favorite, I still had a really good time with it. And I don't believe I've read any of the other nominees. Oh, that's not true. I read The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis. I really liked that book, actually. That was a 5-star read for me. So I guess technically I would put The Hounding above Atmosphere because for me it was more evenly well executed and I just really liked it. It's a little bit weirder and a little more literary than Atmosphere, but fantastic, very well done in my personal opinion, so I would recommend it. I have a reading vlog, Reading the Hounding, if you want to check it out. And that brings us to the final category. Wow, I've been filming for so long, I'm gonna have to work really hard to make this video a reasonable length. But anyway, we've made it to the final category, which is general adult fiction. And the winner with 167,509 votes was My Friends by Fredrik Backman. And I have read from Fredrik Backman before. I read Beartown, which I loved and gave 5 stars to. And then I read the sequel to Beartown, which to me was not nearly as good as the first book. I think I gave it 3 stars. But My Friends has 352,000 ratings and an average rating of 4.38. And when I started reading the winners that I hadn't already read in 2025 in January, I started with My Friends because I thought this would be an easy win, that I would love it, that I'd be able to give a book 5 stars and really start on the right foot. I had a much harder time with this book than I expected. I really thought I would love it, and I found myself struggling, especially through the first half. By the end of it, it won me over a little bit more, but I kind of had a rough time with this. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I thought it was good, but I had a lot of critiques, especially of the first half of this book. It felt to me like Fredrik Backman wanted this dynamic to be like a curmudgeon-y, grumpy grandpa and a kid. I'm thinking, imagine 85-year-old, 90-year-old grandpa and a 12-year-old. That's kind of the dynamic it seemed like he wanted to write. But for some reason, he chose to make the characters 39 and 18 instead of 90 and 12, but he still wrote them like they were 90 and 12. And it was absolutely baffling to me to spend this whole book with a character who's 39, which is not that old. Maybe I'm just showing my own age here as a 33-year-old, but I don't think that 39 is the age where we need to use the washroom every 10 minutes and where we struggle to smile because our face is drooped so much and it's just so much effort to turn the corners of our lips up and every part of our body aches every moment of every day. And we're just the way this character was described, not only did he refer to himself as middle-aged constantly, which was kind of baffling to me, I have been told by the internet that 39 is apparently middle-aged. I think my perspective has been skewed because my parents were both older than 39 when they had me. So to me, middle-aged was like the age of my parents when I was a kid, which was 50s. But I guess that's not the common definition. So fine. But I just felt like this 39-year-old was written as significantly older than he actually was. And then to bounce off of that, our second protagonist, who is meant to be a young adult, is written to be so young, which also just doesn't really make sense for her lived experience. She should, not in a good way. She's had a really rough life, but she would have been forced to grow up very quickly because of the circumstances of her life. But she's acting like a 12-year-old as an 18-year-old. And I thought that was weird. I also felt like some of the things that happen in this book were very kind of like atmosphere. There were moments that felt a little excessively saccharine, trying very hard to be quirky or cute or sentimental. There were quite a few moments that felt extremely convenient, and also sort of twists or reveals that were meant to shock the reader. I kind of felt like Bachman was trying to trick me into feeling things, which always annoys me. I would rather an author just write a story earnestly, with heart, be vulnerable, write a real human raw story and let me feel things because I care about these characters. Don't trick me into feeling things. Then I feel used. Again, by the end of this, I had grown attached to several of the characters. I did feel tears bubbling a few times. I did become invested eventually. I did get accustomed to the way these characters were being written, even if it made no sense to me based on their actual ages. But the payoff for me was not enough to make up for how frustrating I found the first half of the book. And I found the first half of the book so deeply frustrating and very hard to get through. I almost gave up on the book a few times. It felt also like a lot of the book was written to be quotable, written in bite-sized pieces to be removed and put on an Instagram post, or written in a journal and not actually strung together in a book that flows and makes sense. And that made a lot of the dialogue especially feel quite stilted and overly engineered, a little inauthentic, I think. And part of that could have been translation. It was translated, and that is an extra layer of difficulty. And so there is both the original prose and how the translator interprets and translates the prose. So I want to give it a bit of the benefit of the doubt for that, but I also don't remember Beartown or its sequel being written that way at all. Maybe some of Frederick Bachman's other books are written like that, but there was something a little contrived about it, I felt, and forced quirky at times, which didn't quite work for me. I do think there was a core of a really beautiful story there. There were aspects of some of the relationships and some of the exploration of grief that I thought was quite lovely. I did find the sort of artist plotline, both versions of the artist plotline, a little hard to suspend disbelief for. It reminded me a bit of All the Colors of the Dark, which is another book that is very loved that I had a rough time with, although I disliked that book more than my friends. But in that book also, there's a character who's sort of an art prodigy, a painting prodigy, and everything feels very hard to believe and very convenient in a way that I struggled to accept. And I felt similarly here with that plotline. But like I said, by the end, it had won me over quite a bit. I ended up liking it more than I thought I would from the beginning, but I still struggled quite a bit with it. And I could definitely see why people would maybe not get along with this and not enjoy it. I could also see why people would love it and find it very heartwarming and lovely. I could see this one being a bit polarizing, I guess. But I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. I'm not mad that I read it, but I will never reread it. And I wouldn't widely recommend it either because I really struggled with aspects of it. I would definitely recommend Beartown over this one if you were to read one Frederick Bachman. I'm not going to let this stop me from reading more of his work because I do want to check out some of his other books, but for me, this one was a little disappointing. The only other nominee in this category that I have read, I believe, yes, is The Names by Florence Knapp, which I already talked about for the debut novel category. Loved it, gave it 5 stars. I would choose it over my friends. I enjoyed it more than my friends personally, but you know, to each their own. We all have our own taste, obviously. Anyway, I have been filming for so long, much longer than I expected, and I'm tired and it's cold because I had to turn the heat off to film this video because the heat is very loud, but it's also the middle of winter in Canada, so I'm very cold. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope this was interesting or entertaining for you. I would really love to hear your thoughts on any and all of the books mentioned. Also, let me know if any of the books that I haven't read that were nominated for all the categories are worth my time, if you think I'd enjoy them. Let me know for which of these categories you'd be interested in a reading vlog where I pick up the 10 finalists in the category and read all of them and give you my thoughts. I have done those videos in the past. I haven't made one yet for the 2025 Goodreads Choice Awards, so I'm open to suggestions and open to potentially doing more than one if there's interest in multiple genres. I always, like I said, find gems of books that I wouldn't have picked up otherwise that I absolutely adore, and I'm so glad that the challenge forced me to pick them up. But also, every time I read books that I really struggle with and don't enjoy, it's a bit of a challenge. Mixed bag as always, although I will say, I don't know for sure. Future me will calculate and tell you my average rating for the books I read for this video, and then also compare to last year, because I have an inkling that I liked the books better on average this year than last year. I feel like I ranted less. So we'll see. Future me will tell you. Future me will do the math. But anyway, thank you for watching this probably very long video. If you made it all the way to the end, leave an award emoji in the comments for the Goodreads Choice Awards so I know you're a real one. Thank you for watching this whole video. I really appreciate you. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out Ana Luisa with the link in my description box. Their beautiful pieces are so affordable, yet very long lasting and timeless. I love my Ana Luisa pieces, and I know you will too. Thank you again to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.